I was standing at my mother's sink with my hands in dishwater when my father set the wedding invitation on the counter beside me. I knew what it was before I looked at it. Not because I'd been expecting it, I hadn't not in 4 years, but because of the sound it made. Heavy cardstock has a particular sound when it goes down on tile. Money makes that sound. The Vances had always made that sound. I dried my hands on the towel hanging off the oven door and picked it up. Mr. and Mrs. Harlan Vance request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son, Colton Reed Vance, to Miss Brenly and Sutcliffe. Letterpress, so the letters were pressed down into the paper and you could feel them with your thumb. Saturday the 21st of June. 4:30 in the afternoon. The Cordova Point Boathouse, Tacoma, Washington. Addressed on the outer envelope in real ink, in a hand I recognized, because Rosalind Vance had addressed my own wedding invitations at that same dining table 9 years earlier. Ms. Sawyer Landry and guest. My name is Sawyer Landry. I was 31 years old that spring, and I had 3 4-year-olds and a night job and a car with 190,000 miles on it, and I had not set foot in Gig Harbor since the November my marriage ended. We lived in the bottom half of a duplex on South Ainsworth, 8 blocks up from the freeway, in the part of Tacoma where the houses were built for shipyard men in 1943 and have been holding on ever since. 2 bedrooms. The kids had the big one. I had the small one, and in the small one I had a twin bed, a dresser I'd bought off a porch for $20, and a plastic file box that held every important piece of paper in my life. The rent was under market because my grandmother owned the building. Magnolia Landry was 78 years old and lived in the top half. She had been a labor and delivery nurse at the hospital downtown for 31 years, and she still woke at 4:40 in the morning out of pure muscle memory, and she was the reason I had a roof, and she was the reason I had gotten through the first year with 3 infants, and she was also the only member of my family who had never once asked me a question I couldn't answer. The kids were Beau, Junie, and Marlowe. Triplets. They were born on the 6th of February at 34 weeks and 1 day, and they were in the NICU for 19 days, and Beau came home last because his lungs took the longest to decide. Beau was the careful one. He put his shoes in a line by the door without anyone telling him to. Junie talked from the moment her eyes opened until the moment they closed and had opinions about the correct way to arrange a plate. Marlowe was the one who watched. She'd go quiet in a room full of adults and just track everybody back and forth, taking inventory, and then in the car on the way home she would tell you what she'd seen and she would be right. That afternoon they were out back on the swing set my father had assembled in my grandmother's yard with his own hands the spring they turned to, and I could hear the chain going squeak and squeak through the window over the sink. My sister's car was already in the driveway. Georgia is 2 years younger than me. She married Preston Ide, who is in commercial insurance, and they have a house in Gig Harbor with a view of the water from 2 rooms if you stand in the corner of the bedroom, and Georgia mentions the corner. Inside, the house smelled like pot roast and the lemon cleaner my mother has used since 1994. My father is Dallas Landry. He has run a marine supply on Marine View Drive for 31 years, rope, cleats, bottom paint, the kind of store where 3 men stand around the register at 10 in the morning talking about nothing. He is well liked. I want that in early because it matters. He is genuinely widely well liked, and there is no version of this where he is a monster, and that is the whole problem with him. He waited until the plates were cleared. It came Thursday, he said. To you. To the store. He folded his arms. Rosalind sent it to the store. She has my address. She's had it for 9 years. Well, it came to the store. I set the invitation down flat on the counter and squared it up with the edge, which is a thing my hands do when I need them to be doing something. Okay, I said. You're going to go. My mother turned the water off. Georgia was at the table with her phone face down, which is how Georgia listens. No, I said. I'm not. Sawyer. I've got 3 4-year-olds and a Saturday, and I'm not spending it in a room with 400 people from Gig Harbor. It's not 400 people from Gig Harbor. It's a wedding. It's 400 people from Gig Harbor at a wedding. My father did the thing he does where he takes a breath and starts again in a reasonable voice, and the reasonable voice is worse than shouting because you cannot get purchase on it. Here's what I'm telling you, he said. You've been hidden for 4 years. I work 6 days a week. That's not the same as showing your face. He unfolded his arms. You know what people say? People say Sawyer Landry got left and fell apart and hasn't been seen since. That's the story. That's what's out there, and every year you don't turn up somewhere with your chin up, it sets a little harder. And walking into my ex-husband's wedding fixes that. It ends it. He said it like a man laying down a card. One afternoon. You go, you're pleasant, you leave at a reasonable hour, and the story stops being about you. Whose idea was this? Mine. Dad. Mine, he said, and it was almost true, and the almost is where he lives. I looked at my mother's back. She had started the pan again with a lot of attention. When's the lease up? I said. Nobody answered. September, Georgia said to the table. There it was. It took him 11 minutes to get to it, which is faster than usual. So I'm going, I said, so the lease renews. You're going because it's the right thing and because it costs you nothing. It costs me a Saturday and my whole chest. Then it costs you a Saturday. He shrugged. Life's had worse Saturdays. Harlan Vance owns your building. Harlan Vance owns half the buildings on that road. And you've been in that one for 31 years on a handshake and a 5-year paper, and you want me at his son's wedding 12 weeks before you sign the next one, and you'd like me to believe those two facts are strangers to each other. My father put his hand flat on the counter. You want to make this about money, he said. I want to make it about what it is. It's about a family that has to live here. His voice didn't rise. It got flatter and more finished, which is the way he says things he has already decided are over. You had a bad 4 years. I'm sorry about it. I've been sorry about it the whole time, and I have never once said a word to you about the choices that got you there. That is not. And I'm not saying them now. What I'm saying is that there's a room on the 21st with everybody in it, and you can walk into that room like a woman who's fine, or you cannot walk in, and in this town not walking in is a sentence people finish for you. My hands were cold from the dishwater. I could feel my own pulse in the pads of my fingers where they were pressed against the counter, going along at some speed that had nothing to do with me. And the kids? I said. What about them? Do the kids come? He didn't answer for a second, and the second was the whole conversation. It says in guest, he said. It says in guest. That's 1. That's 3, and it says 1, and don't be clever with me. I'm not being clever. I'm asking you a plain question and you've had 4 years to answer it, and I would like to hear you say it out loud one time in your life. And my father, a man who is reasonable at every dinner and every holiday and every funeral this family has ever had, pushed off the counter and snapped it out across the kitchen at me. Because nobody out there needs a reminder of your worst decision. The refrigerator hummed. Out back the swing chain was going squeak and squeak. My mother had stopped washing the pan and was holding it under the running water with both hands and looking at the window. Say that again, I said. You heard me. I want to make sure I heard the whole thing. You'd like me to walk into that boathouse and be seen. Just not with the 3 people who are the reason there's anything to look at. That is not what I said. It's the only thing you said. I'm saying it because you're about to walk into a room full of people who can also count. I stood there with a damp towel in one hand and a piece of letterpress cardstock in the other. Here is what I did not say. I did not say that Colton Vance left our rental on Junot Street on the 11th of November 2021 and moved into his parents' guest house in Gig Harbor, and that on the 22nd of December he came back with a bottle of wine and a story about a mistake, and that he stayed until the 2nd of January. And that his truck was in front of my house for 11 days over the holidays and half of Tacoma drove past it. I did not say that when I told him in February that I was pregnant, he was already gone again, and that he said a specific sentence to me on the phone that I have never repeated to a living soul. I did not say that there is a manila envelope in a plastic file box in a bedroom 8 blocks from the freeway with a laboratory's name across the top of it. I didn't say any of it because I had tried once 22 months earlier at a Thanksgiving, and my father had listened with his head tilted and then said all right, honey, in a voice that meant he had decided I was lying and had decided to be generous about it. You only make somebody give you that voice once. So I folded the towel in half and hung it back on the oven door, and I smoothed it flat with my palm so the 2 ends lined up. Understood, I said, and let it land like a period, not a comma. My voice stayed level. That took something. I want to be accurate about it. It took everything I had in the room, and it was the only thing in that room I owned outright. My father blinked. Well, he said. Good. So you'll go. I said understood. Sawyer, Mom, the roast was good. I picked up my keys off the hook by the back door. Bo's got school pictures Tuesday, so if you want one I'll get you a wallet size. My mother said, that'd be nice, to the window. I went out the back and got my kids off the swing set. Junie wanted 4 more minutes. Bo lined his shoes up on the step before he put them on, and I crouched down and did the laces, and I noticed that my hands were shaking, and I noticed it the way you'd notice weather at a distance, as a fact about the outside world. Marlo stood next to me on the grass. Grandpa was loud, she said. He was. Are we in trouble? No, baby. Nobody's in trouble. She looked at the kitchen window for a second, taking inventory the way she does. Then she handed me the rock because she had not given it to my mother after all, and she said, "You can have it," and got in the car. I drove home the long way down Pacific and then along the water, because the kids fall asleep on the waterfront stretch and because I needed 19 minutes. The tide was out. The flats were shining. There were 2 cranes over the port with their lights already on even though it wasn't dark, and a container ship was coming in slow past Browns Point. In the back, all 3 of them were out by the time I hit the 11th Street Bridge. Magnolia was on the porch when I pulled up in her cardigan with the yellow bug light on. She helped me carry Junie in. We got all 3 into the big bedroom in stages, and Bo woke up halfway through and asked for water and was asleep again before I brought it, and Magnolia stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and looked at them for a while the way she does. Then she went into my kitchen and put the kettle on without asking me. He said something, she said. How do you know? Because you drove the waterfront. You only drive the waterfront when he said something. She got 2 mugs down. Was it about money or was it about the babies? Both. That's new. Usually he does them one at a time. I put the invitation on the table between us. Magnolia read it without picking it up. Her mouth got smaller. The 21st, she said. Cordova Point Boathouse. That's 400 people. She poured. And Dallas wants you to walk in there by yourself so Harlan Vance signs a piece of paper in September. He didn't say it in that order. He never does. She sat down. Are you going to go? No. Grandma. I didn't say anything. You said She turned her mug a quarter turn on the table, which is her version of choosing her words. I've been at this a long time, she said. I have watched an enormous number of people decide what they can live with. And I have never once in 78 years seen anybody get talked out of being ashamed. Not by arguing. Argument's no good. The only thing I've ever seen work is a room. A room. A room and everybody in it all at once with no way for anybody to go home and retell it different. She looked at me over the mug. That's the only thing that's ever done it. You can decide whether that's worth a Saturday. My phone buzzed face down on the table. I turned it over. A 253 number, local, not one I had. It buzzed again and stopped, and then the voicemail icon came up about 40 seconds later, which meant whoever it was had left a long one. I put it on speaker. The recording started with about 3 seconds of a car, a blinker and a highway underneath it, and then a woman's voice, and I knew it on the first syllable because I had heard that voice tell a caterer where to put a table, and I had heard it in a hospital corridor in 2019 when Colton's grandfather died, and I had not heard it since a Tuesday in November 4 years ago. Sire? It's Rosalind. A breath. The blinker stopped. I want you to know that I mailed that invitation myself, and I did not mail it to your father's store by accident, and I need you to hear the whole of this before you delete it. Magnolia set her mug down without a sound. There's something in Colton's file at Harlan's office, Rosalind Vance said, and I have known about it since the spring of 2022, and I am ashamed of every one of the 4 years I've said nothing about it. That's the truth and it's ugly and I'm not going to dress it up on a voicemail. The highway noise went on underneath her. She was driving somewhere and she was not going to stop the car to do this, which told me she'd decided that if she stopped she would talk herself out of it. Harlan keeps a file on each of the boys. Insurance, the trust paperwork, the medical. It's a filing cabinet in his study and it is not locked, and I want to be clear that I did not go looking. I was pulling the homeowner's policy in March of 2022 because a tree came down on the Ruston house, and Colton's folder was in front of the one I wanted, and there was something in it that was not insurance. A truck went past her, close, and the recording washed out for a second. I put it back. I want you to hear me say that. I saw it and I put it back and I closed the drawer and I have gone to that cabinet probably 40 times since and I have not opened it again. Magnolia's hand had come across the table and stopped about 4 inches from mine and stayed there. Sawyer, I know that you tried to tell people something in 2022. My sister heard about it at a Thanksgiving from your mother. That's how it came to me, secondhand at my own kitchen table as gossip. And I did nothing. A breath in and out, and when the voice came back it had gone down about half a step. Colton is my son and I love him and I have made every excuse a mother is capable of making. But he is getting married on the 21st and Brenly is 26 years old and she does not know either, and I have come to the end of what I can carry. The blinker started again. I'm not going to tell you what's in the folder on a phone. I'll tell you to your face and I'll tell you what date is on it, and then it's yours and I'll live with whatever you do. Call me back. Any hour. I mean that literally any hour. I don't sleep anymore. The message ended at 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Neither of us moved for a while. The kettle had stopped ticking on the burner. Out on Ainsworth somebody's car alarm went off and cut itself short. Magnolia said, "Play it again." I played it again. The second time through I heard the thing I'd missed. She'd said the medical in a list of ordinary items and hadn't slowed down for it. Insurance, the trust paperwork, the medical. Do you believe her? Magnolia said. Yes. Why? Because she said the ugly part about herself before she said the ugly part about him. People who are managing you do that in the other order. My grandmother nodded slowly. Are you going to call her back tonight? No. Sawyer. I've got the clinic at 8 and Marlowe's got the dentist at 3:40, and if I call that woman tonight I will not sleep, and if I don't sleep tomorrow gets done badly. I put the phone face down on the table. It's kept 4 years. It'll keep till Wednesday. Magnolia looked at me for a long moment, and then she did something she almost never does, which was reach over and put her hand flat on top of my head, the way you'd do to a much smaller person. Your mother could not have said that sentence at 31, she said. I want you to know that. Wednesday didn't happen because Tuesday happened first. I got out of the clinic at 2 and picked up all 3 from Miss Alva's, which is a home daycare on South G with a fenced yard and a woman who has been doing it since 1988 and charges me under what she charges anybody else, and has never once let me thank her out loud for it. Marlowe's dentist was at 3:40. Junie and Beau came along because there was nowhere else to put them, and they sat in the waiting room with a bin of blocks while Marlowe got her teeth counted. We were coming out at 4:15 when my sister called. Are you home? Georgia said. I'm on 6th. Can you come by? Preston's at his mom's So it's just me. Come by. Georgia's house in Gig Harbor is the kind of house where the entry has a bench in it that nobody has ever sat on. She met me at the door with a glass of wine already going and looked past me at the car. They're in the car? Therefore, Georgia, they're not going to hotwire it. I'm parked in your driveway. Bring them in, I've got the... She waved at the back of the house. There's a thing in the family room. The thing in the family room was a television the size of a door playing Animals That Sing, and my children went into it the way water goes into a drain, and Georgia and I stood in her kitchen on either side of an island the length of my bedroom. Dad called me last night, she said. I figured. He's not wrong, Sawyer. That's a hell of an opener. Okay. She set the bottle down. Okay, but hear the whole thing because I've thought about this since Sunday and I'm going to say it badly and I want credit for saying it at all. Go ahead. You think this is about the store. I think the store is in it. The store's in it. Fine. The store's in it. She turned her glass by the stem. But it's not why he's like this and you know it isn't. He's like this because for 4 years he has stood in that shop and had men ask him how his daughter's doing, and he has said fine, and then they've gone out to the parking lot. And that's my fault. It's not about fault. It sounds a great deal like fault. It's about a man who can't stand being pitted, Georgia said, which, incidentally, is also a description of you. I let that sit. It wasn't wrong and it wasn't the point, and she knew both of those things. Why am I here, Georgia? She looked at the family room. Junie was narrating the television to Beau, who was not listening, and Marlowe was standing about 4 feet back from both of them with her hands behind her, watching the room instead of the screen. It's because of them. She tipped her head toward the family room, toward the singing animals. That's the whole thing. That's all it's ever been. I know that. No, you know it in a general way. I'm going to say the specific way and then you can throw me out of my own kitchen. She put the glass down. If you walk into that boathouse alone in a nice dress and you're pleasant to Rosalind and you don't stay for dinner, then in 8 days it's over. People say, oh, she came, good for her, wasn't that gracious, and it dies. That's it. That's the whole cost. And if I bring my children? Then it's never over, Georgia said. Not for you and not for them. Then it's a thing that happened at a wedding and it gets told for 20 years and it gets told badly and every single person in that room goes home and does the arithmetic on their own out loud in the car, and there is no version of that arithmetic where you come out of it as anything but the woman who did it in front of 400 people. Did what? Sawyer. No, say it. Did what, Georgia? Made a claim you can't prove. She got loud and pulled it back immediately, the way she does, glancing toward the family room. That's what it is. That is exactly what it is. A claim you can't prove, made in the worst possible room. A test in a folder that nobody's going to ask to see. She said it fast and then she stopped because she'd said the last part out loud. I set my keys down on her island very carefully. Say that again. Sawyer, you said a folder. I said, she put her hand over her mouth for a second. Mom told me, years ago, that you'd said something about a test at a Thanksgiving. Mom told you? Yes. When? I don't know. 22, 23. It was a phone call. She said it like she was worried about you. Worried about me? That's the word she used. Did you ever ask me? Georgia looked at the counter. No, she said. In 3.5 years, did anybody in this family ever ask me one question about it? No. Not one. No, Sawyer. I didn't fill the silence after that. I let it go for about 6 full seconds, and Georgia looked at the counter for 4 of them and then up at me for the last 2, and I have thought many times since about what was on her face, and the honest answer is that it was relief. Not cruelty. Relief. She had been carrying a thing she'd decided not to look at, and I had just taken it out of the drawer for her, and some part of her was glad to be done being the person who hadn't. Because if you'd asked, I said, I'd have told you. I know. No. Listen to what I'm saying. If any one of you had ever asked me a single plain question, I would have driven to your house and put it on that island and said, here, read this, and you know exactly what I'd have been putting down, because you just described it. You called it a test in a folder. You've been calling it that in your own head for 3 years. That's not what It's precisely what you meant. I picked my keys back up. You didn't ask because you didn't want the answer in the room. Because as long as nobody's asked, everybody gets to keep being reasonable about it. Don't do that. I'm not doing anything to you, Georgia. I'm telling you what 4 years looked like from where I was standing. And where were you standing? At a sink, I said. Mostly at a sink. Then I got my kids off the rug and put their shoes on and drove home. I want to explain about the notebook because everything after this runs through it. I didn't do the first year by myself and I did not do it by myself. But I was the one who kept the notebook. It was a composition book, the kind with the marbled cover, that I bought at the drugstore on 6th for $1.79 because the hospital had sent me home with a feeding log and I ran out of pages. 19 days in the NICU and then the log kept going because once you have been keeping a record of a thing every 90 minutes for 3 weeks you cannot stop, and also because a nurse in the NICU named Deb had told me, in the middle of the night on day 4, write it down, honey, all of it, because there's going to be a day you need to prove to somebody that you did it, and that somebody might be you. So there were columns. Time, which baby, how much, and a column at the end I'd made myself for anything else. Bo, 3:10 a.m., 42 milliliters, coughing again, called nurse line, told me to watch it. Junie, 3:55 a.m., 60 milliliters, good Marlowe, 4:30 a.m., 51 milliliters, spit up most, retry 5:15, retry, 38 milliliters, 6 a.m., grandma came down. That's a page. There are 206 of them. In the last week of March, a nurse practitioner at the pediatric clinic on Union, Deb's friend, actually that's how it happened, sat down across from me during a well visit and said gently that if there was ever going to be a question about paternity, the cheapest and easiest window was now, while I was already in the system, and that there was a lab in Kent that did it for $400 if you brought the swabs in yourself, and that a legal test needed a chain of custody, but a legal test also needed the father. I said the father wasn't going to participate. She said there was another way and that she would not recommend it and could not help me with it, and then she told me exactly what it was, which is that a first-degree relative, a grandparent, produces a result strong enough to be conclusive. Rosalind Vance had come to the NICU. Twice. In February, both times without Harlan, both times for about 20 minutes, and both times she had held whichever baby the nurses handed her and cried without making any noise and left before visiting hours ended. On the second visit she'd brought coffee in a cardboard tray and left the empty cups in the bin by the door. I'd taken one. I want to be honest about what that was. It was 4 in the morning on day 11 and I was not entirely a rational person, and I took a used cup out of a hospital trash can and put it in a paper bag in my hospital bag because some animal part of my brain said keep it, and I did not have a plan for it and I did not touch it again for 5 weeks. Then in April I drove it to Kent with 3 swabs and a kit, and I paid $400 I did not have, and I put my initials in a box on a form. The results came on the 9th of May 2022 in a plain envelope with a laboratory's name across the top left in blue. Tuesday night after George's, I put the kids down at 7:40 and sat on the floor with my back against the bed and pulled the plastic file box out from under it. Everything I own that matters is in that box. The birth certificates, all 3 with the father line blank. The custody paperwork that isn't custody paperwork because there was never anybody to have custody with. The lease Magnolia had drawn up so it would be a real lease. The NICU discharge summaries. The composition book, the marbled one with a rubber band around it now because the spine had let go. I reached into the box and pulled out the manila envelope from the bottom. It had the lab's name across the top left and my own handwriting on the front where I'd written the date I opened it, and it had been in that box in that room since the 12th of May 2022, and I had taken it out exactly twice. I unfolded the report slowly, the way you'd open something that had been folded that long. The creases had gone soft and fibrous and the paper wanted to tear along them. I laid it flat on the bed. 2 pages. A table of loci with numbers in it that meant nothing to me then and mean nothing to me now, and then at the bottom of the second page, in a sentence written by somebody who has written it 10,000 times. Probability of grandparentage, 99.94%. 3 lines. Child A, Child B, Child C. I sat on the floor and looked at it for a while, which was the first time I had looked at it in 3 years and 2 months. Then I reached back into the box and took out the second thing, which is the one nobody knows about at all. It's a phone. An old flip phone 4 years dead in a sandwich bag. On the 9th of February 2022, the triplets were 3 days old, and Beau was still on the CPAP, and I was sitting in the family room off the NICU at 11:40 at night with my shoes off. Colton Reed Vance called me for the first and only time. I did not decide to record it. The phone was in my hand and the call came in and I hit a button and then another button and it recorded, and I sat there and let it, and afterward I put that phone in a bag and bought a different one and never used it again. He says a number of things on that recording. Most of them are the ordinary things a frightened 29-year-old man says at 11:40 at night, and I have never held those against him and I don't now. But at 4 minutes and 30 seconds I ask him whether he's going to come and see them. And he answers. I put the phone back in the bag and the bag back in the box, and I put the report back in the envelope and the envelope back under everything else, and then I got up off the floor and stood in my kitchen for a while with the light off. Here is the thing about having it. Everybody assumes that having the truth and being able to use it are the same thing. They are not remotely the same thing, and the distance between them is where I lived for 4 years. A grandparentage test obtained from a coffee cup out of a hospital bin is not a document you put on a table. It's a document you keep. It answers the question for me and it answers it for nobody else, and the day I ever waved it at anyone in that family would be the last day anyone in that family took me seriously about anything, because the only thing they'd see is a woman who went through a trash can. So I understood the truth, and being able to spend it were 2 different currencies, and I had a great deal of one and none of the other. That's what 3.5 years in a plastic box is. I called Rosalind Vance at 6:50 on Wednesday morning, standing in my own kitchen with the coffee going, because 6:50 is a time when I have said something to nobody yet and my voice is still mine. She answered on the second ring and did not say hello. "Thank you," she said. "Where?" "Anywhere you want. I'll drive to you. There's a coffee place on 6th called Perpetua's. 7:30 tomorrow. I have to be at work at 9. I'll be there at 7. 7:30 is fine. I'll be there at 7, she said, because if I sit in that car for 30 minutes I'll have decided what to say, and I don't want to have decided what to say. She was there at 7. I know because I came at 20 past and she was already at the back table with a cup she hadn't touched, in a good coat, with her hands flat on the table on either side of the cup like a woman waiting outside a room where somebody is in surgery. Rosalind Vance is 66. She has the kind of face that people describe as handsome when they mean it as a compliment and haven't got another word. She used to send me birthday cards with a $20 bill in them, for 4 years including the year I was 30, and we had not spoken since November. I sat down across from her and put my keys on the table and did not take my coat off. I'm going to say the date first, she said, because I've been rehearsing the other parts and I don't trust myself with them. All right. The 27th of October, 2022. I put my hands around my own cup. That's the date on the document in Colton's folder, she said. Not the day Harlan got it. The day the laboratory issued it. What laboratory? A Seattle laboratory. It's on a lawyer's letterhead, not a doctor's. There's a cover sheet from Mullins, who is Harlan's attorney and has been for 30 years, and there's a page stapled to the back of it that has signatures and times on it going down the page in a column. A chain of custody sheet. I didn't know that's what it was called until you just said it. Her chin came up very slightly. But yes. Signatures and times stapled to the back. Perpetua's grinder went for about 15 seconds and then the room was quiet again. Whose sample? I said. Rosalind Vance looked at me and then she reached down beside her chair and brought up a canvas tote, and she reached into it and took out a legal pad, a plain yellow one half-used, with the top sheets folded back over the cardboard. I want you to understand that I have never done anything like this, she said. In March of 2022 I stood in my husband's study with a folder in my hands for about 90 seconds and I read one page and I put it back, and I have not opened that drawer since, and everything I am about to tell you is from 90 seconds 3 years ago and from my own handwriting on this pad in the parking lot afterward, in the car, before I could lose it. She turned the pad around and slid it across. Her handwriting is beautiful. It's the same hand that addressed my wedding invitations. Lab Seattle. October 27, 22. Mullins Ltr HD. Avuncular, 99.98/99.98/99.97 Child ABC Sample 2, BHV. I didn't know what avuncular meant, Rosalind said. I looked it up in the car. It means uncle. Yes. Mrs. Vance. I put my finger on the last line. Who is BHV? And she said it evenly, without any weight on it at all, the way you'd give somebody directions. Colton has a brother. Colton doesn't have a brother. Colton has a brother. Beauregard Harlan Vance. He's 38. He lives in Bend and he builds furniture, and he has not been in my husband's house since 2014, and there are no photographs of him up, and I have not said his name out loud at a dinner table in 11 years. The grinder went again. Somebody laughed at the counter. Harlan couldn't test Colton, I said. No. Because Colton would have had to hand over a swab and ask why. Yes. So he used the brother. He used Beau, Rosalind said, and it was the first time her voice moved. He drove to Bend in October of 2022 and sat in that shop for 2 hours and came home with something in an envelope, and I actually thought at the time, God help me, that they'd made up. I looked at the pad at 4 numbers in a beautiful hand on cheap yellow paper. 99.98, 99.98, 99.97. He knew, I said. He has known since the 27th of October, 2022. And you've known since March. I've known since March, she said, and that is the part one came here to say out loud to your face, and I would like you to not make it easier for me. I didn't. I let her sit in it. I didn't say it's all right, and I didn't say I understand, and I didn't reach across the table, and every one of those was available to me, and every one of them would have cost her something later. There's one more thing, she said finally, and it's the reason I mailed the invitation to the store instead of your house. Go on. His name is on that intake form and I know why, and that's what I came to tell you. Whose name? Rosalind Vance turned her cup a quarter turn on the table, which is a thing I had never seen anybody but my grandmother do. Your father's, she said. I did not say anything for a while, and Rosalind Vance let me not say it, which I have thought about since. Say the rest, I said. There's a line on the intake sheet for who presented the minors. It's a printed form and somebody had written on it in pen, and I only saw it for a second, and I have spent 3 years telling myself I read it wrong. She kept her hands flat on the table. D. Landry. Grandfather. Perpetua's door went and let in a piece of the street and shut again. You're certain? No, she said. I'm not certain of anything except that I read those 7 letters and I put the folder back and I drove to a parking lot and wrote on a legal pad. If you want certainty, you'll have to get it from somewhere that isn't me. Where would that be? The pediatric office in Gig Harbor, she said. If there were children in a room and a swab taken, there's a note. There's always a note. My mother was a bookkeeper and she used to say the paper doesn't care whose side it's on. I looked at her handwriting on the yellow pad for a while. Why now? I said. Not why at all. Why this month? Because Brenly asked me to help her write her vows, Rosalind said, and I sat at my own dining table and listened to a 26-year-old girl try to find a word for what kind of man she was marrying, and I gave her one. She picked up her cup for the first time and set it down again without drinking. I'd like to say I've been building to this for 3 years. I haven't. I've been avoiding it for 3 years, and then on the 4th of May I did one specific dishonest thing and I couldn't get back from it. The pediatric office in Gig Harbor opens at 8. I called at 4 minutes past from the parking lot behind the clinic where I work, sitting in a car with 190,000 miles on it, with the engine off and a coffee going cold in the cup holder. Medical records. My name, their names, dates of birth, the 6th of February. I am the parent. There is no other parent on any form in that building and there never has been. What dates are you looking for? October of 2022. Typing. I've got a visit on the 14th. You want the full chart or the visit summary? Full chart. And I want to know what labs were ordered that day. More typing. There's no labs ordered, she said. There was a metabolic panel. There's no metabolic panel. There's no order at all. There's a nurse note. She read it the way people read out of a screen, flat, with the punctuation showing. Buccal specimen collected ×3 per outside request, no order in chart, materials supplied by party presenting. Sign-in shows presented by grandparent D. Landry with written parental consent on file. There's a written parental consent on file. That's what it says. Can you tell me whose signature is on it? There was a pause on the line that had a person in it. It's yours, she said. It's a photocopy. Ma'am, I'm going to send you the whole chart. You should have the whole chart. I sat in that parking lot for 11 minutes and I did not cry and I did not call anybody. In October of 2022, my father asked to take the kids for an afternoon because my mother wanted them and I was on a double, and he brought them back at 6 with pizza on their shirts, and I remember being grateful and I remember saying so. And in November of 2022, he signed a 5-year renewal on a building on Marine View Drive. The chart came through at 9:40. 4 pages. I printed it at the clinic on the machine we use for referrals, and I put it in the plastic file box that night, and it was the third thing in there that meant anything. My father came to the duplex on Thursday at 7:40 in the evening. He had never come to the duplex. In 4 years he had come twice, both times to the yard, once for the swing set and once to look at a gutter, and he had not been through the front door since the day I moved in. He stood in the middle of my front room and looked at it, the couch from the thrift store on 38th, the 3 toy bins with the names taped on, the composition book on the shelf under the television with a rubber band around it, my grandmother's floor above us with her walking across it. Georgia says you're upset with her, he said. Sit down. I'm not going to be here long. Sit down anyway. He sat on the edge of the thrift store couch with his forearms on his knees, a man in a jacket in a small room, and I sat across from him in the chair and I put 4 pages face down on the table between us. The kids? Upstairs with my grandmother till 8:30. Good. On the 14th of October, 2022, I said, you took my children for an afternoon. He did not move. I want to be precise, he did not move at all, and a man who has done nothing moves. I took them a lot of afternoons. You took them that one to the pediatric office in Gig Harbor? Your mother wanted them, he said, and you were on a double and there was a checkup that had been rescheduled twice. That was the first one. I let him finish and there was nothing to finish, and the not finishing went on for about 4 seconds and then died in the middle of the sentence, because he heard it himself. Their pediatrician is on Union, I said. It's been on Union since they were 9 weeks old. You've driven them there. You know where it is. Sawyer. There was no checkup. There's no order in the chart. There's a nurse note that says buccal specimen collected, ×3 per outside request, materials supplied by party presenting. I turned the top page over and slid it across. That's a swab. 3 swabs. You brought the kid in with you. He looked at the page. He did not pick it up. And there's a written parental consent, I said. It's a photocopy of my signature off something else. I'd like to know what off. The daycare form, he said. That was the second one, and it came out of him before he could look at it, and it was the true answer, and I saw him understand about half a second later that he had just answered a question that assumed everything. The daycare form, I said. Sawyer, listen to me. Miss Alva's enrollment sheet. That's the only thing with my signature you'd have had in a drawer at the store. Harlan Vance asked me a question, my father said. And there it was, and he came up off the couch a little to say it, and his voice did the thing it does, going flatter and more finished. Harlan Vance asked me a question and I answered it. That's all it was. That is the entire size of it. A man asked me whether I was sure, and I said I'd get him something so he'd stop asking, and I did, and that was the end of it, and nothing happened. Nothing happened. Nothing happened, he said. Nobody did anything to anybody. There was no lawsuit. There was no scene. Everybody went on with their lives. Do you know what came back? No. Look at me and say that. I don't know what came back, my father said, because I never asked, and I want you to hear me. I did not want to know. I have not wanted to know one single day of the last 4 years. You didn't want to know whether those 3 children asleep over your head are your grandchildren. They're my grandchildren either way, he said, and it came out with something in it, and he put his hand up and turned a quarter away and stood there breathing, and when he came back around his voice had dropped into something lower and worse, which is where he keeps the things he actually believes. That is not the question, and you know it isn't. Nobody in this family has ever once treated those babies as anything but ours. Not one time. Not one. That's true. Then what are we doing? We're doing the 12th of November, I said. He stopped. The report's dated the 27th of October, I said. You signed on the 12th of November. 12 days. That lease had been in negotiation since August. On what terms? Sawyer. On what terms in August and on what terms on the 12th of November? Because you told my mother at Thanksgiving that Harlan had come down $2 a foot and you'd never seen anything like it in 31 years, and she told Georgia and Georgia told me, because that's the transmission system in this family, and it has never once carried anything to me directly. My father stood in the middle of my front room. Nobody bought me, he said. I didn't say bought. Then say what you're saying. I'm saying you looked at a document in October of 2022 and decided the cheapest thing in the room was me. I stood up too because I was not going to have this conversation looking up at him. I'm saying a man who has never taken a discount in his life took one, and I'm saying you have known since the 12th of November that Harlan Vance had an answer in a drawer, and in 3.5 years you have never once asked him what it was, and you have never once asked me what was in mine. You never said you had anything. I said it at a Thanksgiving. You said something at a Thanksgiving. I said the words "there's a test, Dad," out loud at your table 22 months ago. My voice did not go up, and I want that in the record. And you tilted your head and you said, "All right, honey." Upstairs my grandmother crossed her kitchen and the ceiling made the sound it makes. You want to know the part I've never been able to get past? I said. It isn't the swab. It's that you already had it. You had the answer in October of 2022 and you sat at a table in November of 2022 and let a room decide I was a liar, and you had the receipt in your own hand. I did not have any. You had the receipt. The receipt is a chart note from the pediatric office in Gig Harbor that says the specimen was collected per outside request, and the outside is your landlord. My father's phone went off in his jacket. He took it out and looked at it and turned it face down on my table without stopping it, and I saw the name on it before it went over, and it was my mother. It rang out and started again 40 seconds later. She knows you're here, I said. She knows. Did she know in 2022? He didn't answer. Dad. Your mother, he said carefully, asked me one time in the car in the spring of 2023 whether there had been a test, and I told her there hadn't been, and she has never asked me again, and she has never once in 3 years believed me. So that's 2 of you. That's 2 of us. And Georgia makes 3, and Rosalind Vance makes 4, and Harlan Vance makes 5. I picked the 4 pages back up off the table and squared them. 5 people knew there was a piece of paper in the world, and every one of you decided the safest thing was for me to be the woman who couldn't let it go. He put both hands on the back of my chair. Sit down, I said. I'm going to read you something and then you can go. Sawyer, 2 minutes. I went and got the composition book off the shelf under the television and took the rubber band off it and sat back down. This is the feeding log, I said. It starts on the 7th of February 2022 in the NICU and it runs to the 12th of August. There are 206 pages. I'm going to read you 4. I don't need. You don't need it. I need it. Sit down. He sat down. Bo, 3:10 a.m., 42 mils, coughing again, called the nurse line, told me to watch it. Junie, 3:55, 60 mils, good. Marlo, 4:30, 51 mils, spit up most, retry at 5:15. 5:15, retry, 38 mils. 6 a.m., Grandma came down. I turned the page. That's the 9th of March. Here's the 2nd of April. Bo, 1:40 a.m., pulled the tape off his cheek, cried 40 minutes, no idea why. Junie, 2:15. Marlo, 2:50, 48. 3:30, called the nurse line about Bo's breathing, told me it was fine. 4:10, called again. 5 a.m., went and sat in the car for 10 minutes. I turned 2 more. Here's the 19th of June. 12 entries. Here's the 7th of August. 9. The last page is the 12th of August and it just says all 3 slept through, and there's nothing after it, because that was the night it stopped being an emergency. I closed the book. 19 weeks, I said. Every 90 minutes. My grandmother did every second night for the first 4 months and she was 74 years old. Nobody else in this family was ever in that room. My father was looking at the floor. I know what you did, he said quietly. You don't though. That's what I'm telling you. You know that it was hard. You've said it was hard at holidays in a general way as a compliment. I put the book on the table on top of the 4 pages. But there's a difference between a thing being hard and a thing being done by a specific person on a specific schedule, and the difference is written down, and you have never once asked to see it. He sat there for a while. And then my father, the man who assembled a swing set in my grandmother's yard with his own hands, who is well liked, who has stood behind a register on Marine View Drive for 31 years, turned around in my front room and hissed it at me. Them? The decision is them, Sawyer. A 28-year-old girl decides she's keeping 3 babies by a man who has already left, alone on nothing, in a duplex, and every person in this county watched her do it and every person in this county has an opinion about it, and you cannot fix that with a piece of paper. You can't. There is no document on this earth that makes that a different story. So the story's the problem. The story is the only thing there is. His voice hardened. The paper doesn't matter. The paper has never mattered. What matters is what a room sees, and a room sees a woman making a scene. And that's why you want me at that wedding. That's why I want you at that wedding. Alone in a nice dress, 40 minutes gone. Because if you go in there like that, then in 8 days it's finished, and if you walk into that boathouse, whatever's in it, you will be 45 years old in a town where everybody remembers, and so will they. And that's the part one cannot get you to hear. Nobody out there needs a reminder of your worst decision. Second time. The same 11 words in the same order, the same small stress on worst, a sentence that had been sitting somewhere in him fully assembled, ready, waiting for a door, for long enough that it came out identical twice in 5 days. I counted the pause instead of answering it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Get out of my house, I said. Sawyer. Get out of my house. He picked his keys up off the arm of the couch. At the door he stopped with his hand on the knob, and he didn't turn around. I'm not a criminal, he said. No. Then what am I? You're a man who took a discount, I said. You taught me that word. Upstairs a drawer shut and my grandmother said something and Marlo laughed, 1 syllable the way she does. He went out and pulled the door to behind him gently, the way you do in a house with sleeping children in it, and that gentleness is the part one have never been able to put down. Saturday morning I drove to Bend. 6 hours and 10 minutes each way, and I did it in 1 day, and Magnolia had all 3 from 6 in the morning and did not ask me a single question about it until Tuesday. Beauregard Vance builds furniture in a shop off Highway 20 with a hand-lettered sign and a dog. He is 38 and he has his mother's face and none of his father's, and he came out wiping his hands on a rag and looked at me for about 2 seconds. You're Colton's wife, he said. I was. Bo? He put his hand out. You drove 6 hours. I did. You could have asked me on the phone. You could have said no on the phone. The corner of his mouth moved. That's fair. He took me inside and cleared a stool and turned off the compressor so we could hear each other. The shop smelled like sawdust and coffee that had been on too long. I told him what I had in date order, the way I'd told my grandmother, and he listened without moving and did not ask me to repeat anything. When I got to the 27th of October, his face changed. October of 2022, he said. A lab in Seattle on a lawyer's letterhead, chain of custody, ordered and paid for by Harlan Vance. Avuncular, that's an uncle to a child. 2 samples. One of them's my kid's. The other one's initialed BHV. He came up here, Bo said. The 2nd week of October. He sat where you're sitting for 2 hours and we talked about my mother's knee and the Ruston house, and he asked me for a swab for a health history thing his doctor wanted, because of his father's heart. And you gave it to him? I gave it to him. He looked at the floor for a second. He hadn't been in this shop in 8 years. I'd have given him a kidney that afternoon. The compressor was off and the shop was very quiet. When did you find out what it was for? February. 4 months later in a letter, which is how my father does things. Bo stood up. Wait. He went to the back where the wall meets the bench and there was a rolling cabinet pushed up against it, and he moved the router table and he pulled the bottom drawer. He reached into it and took out a plain white letter-size envelope, unlabeled, and brought it back and handed it to me. That's yours, Bo said. I don't want it. I've wanted it out of that drawer for 4 years and I did not know who on earth to give it to. I unfolded it slowly. 2 pages on the same Seattle Laboratories letterhead as the block letters on Rosalind's yellow pad, with a courier's tracking number and my children designated as Child A, Child B, and Child C. I laid it flat on the bench under the shop lights. Combined avuncular index, 4,982 to 1. 99.98. 99.98. 99.97. And stapled to the back, a page of signatures and times going down in a column, and at the top of it on the intake line in ballpoint, in handwriting I have known my entire life. D. Landry, grandparent, W/parental consent attached. Do they get money? I said. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not going to guess. Bo put his hands in his pockets. But there's a trust. It's my grandfather's. It's a 51-year-old instrument and I have never read it and neither has Colton, and my father has been the trustee since 1996. He almost smiled. It's recorded or the ground leases anyway. Somebody who knows how to look could find it in an afternoon. Why are you helping me? Because I've got a nephew and 2 nieces I've never met, he said, and because in 11 years my father has not once asked me a question he didn't already know the answer to, and in October of 2022 he asked me one, and I want to know what it cost me. I drove back that night and got in at 10 to midnight and my grandmother had left the porch light on and a plate in the oven. Tuesday, the 17th of June. 4 days out. Delilah Pruitt has a corner office on the 11th floor of a building in Seattle and 40 minutes of free consultation, and a habit of not writing anything down until you've finished. She is 60 and she practices trusts and estates, and she took my call because Magnolia had delivered her sister's twins in 1991, which is the entire reason any of this happened, and I want that in the record too. I put it all on her conference table in date order. The grandparentage report from May of 2022. The chart note from the pediatric office. The avuncular report with the chain of custody and my father's handwriting on the intake line. The composition book. And the old flip phone in a sandwich bag. 5 things. I looked at the 5 documents laid out across her conference table, 3 years of my life in paper, sitting in a room 11 floors above a street where nobody knew my name, and it was the first time any of it had ever been outside my bedroom. She read for 19 minutes without speaking. All right, she said. The phone. There's a recording on it. February 2022. 9 minutes and 4 seconds. Were you a party to the call? Yes. Did he know he was being recorded? No. Delilah Pruitt took her glasses off. Then it's a brick, she said. Washington is an all-party consent state. Both sides have to know. A private conversation recorded without the other party's consent is inadmissible here, and it's a criminal violation to make it, and it is also actionable civilly against you. She put the glasses back on. I'm going to say the next part plainly because people in your position do not always hear it. Do not play that recording to anybody in a position to act on it. Do not send it. Do not describe it in writing to your father or to Vance or to me on email. It cannot help you, and it can be used to take everything else on this table and make it a story about what you did. I've had it 4 years. I believe you. 4 years is the only reason I'm not more worried, because a person building a case doesn't leave a weapon in a sandwich bag under a bed. She pushed it back toward me with one finger. Put it away. What you actually have is better. Which part? The chain of custody sheet. She tapped it. This is the whole thing. This isn't your test. This is Harlan Vance's test, ordered by Harlan Vance's attorney, paid for by Harlan Vance, with Harlan Vance's own handwriting on the cover sheet and your father's on the intake, and it says what it says, and he has been sitting on it since October of 2022 while serving as the trustee of an instrument that names his son's issue as a beneficiary class. She let that sit for a second. That's not a family argument, Delilah said. That's a fiduciary problem and it's not close. I don't know what that means. It means he had a legal duty to identify the beneficiaries and he had actual knowledge and he did nothing for 3 years and 8 months, and the remedy for that is an accounting, and the accounting is not discretionary, and it does not require anybody in Gig Harbor to like you. She wrote a number on a pad and turned it around. The ground lease is 11 acres at the port. That's what the trust actually holds. It's been distributing since 1996. I looked at the number. So here's my advice, she said, and you're going to hate it. I send a letter Thursday. To Harlan Vance and to Mullins, requesting the instrument and a full accounting, as parent and natural guardian of 3 minors I'll name. That's all. No claim, no threat, no press, no scene. And the wedding? Don't go. My father. I'm aware of your father. I've met 400 of him. She folded her hands. You don't need a room, Sawyer. That's the thing people in your position never believe. You have documents and a fiduciary duty and a statute. The room does nothing for you legally and it can only cost you. And what does it cost me not to go? Delilah Pruitt looked at me for a while. 4 years more of what you've already had, she said. I'm a lawyer. I'm telling you the legally correct answer, and I'd rather you spend Saturday knowing than have you spend it performing. But I'm not going to pretend I've solved the other thing because I haven't, and I don't think there's a letter that does. She sent it at 8:40 Thursday morning. Harlan Vance called me at 3:20 that afternoon. I was at the clinic. I took it in the parking lot with my back against the car. Ms. Landry, he said. Mr. Vance. I've read your attorney's letter. A pause and paper and a chair. I'm not going to insult you by asking whether you know. I know. Since when? Since May of 2022. Mine's a grandparentage test. Yours is better. Yes, Harlan Vance said. Mine is better. I did not fill it. I want to tell you what I want, which is what you asked me for, I said. An accounting and the instrument and their names on it spelled correctly. That's the whole list. I'm not asking you for an apology and I wouldn't know what to do with one. Harlan Vance was quiet for a long moment. You know what my wife did, he said. Yes. Do you want to know what your father did? I know what my father did. You know the shape of it. The line went a little away from the receiver and came back. In October of 2022, I asked Dallas Landry a question in my office on Marine View Drive, because I have spent 4 years making sure nobody in this county had to look at them, and it turns out I'm the one who's been sitting in a room by himself. Nobody out there needs a reminder of your worst decision. That's what your father said to me in my office in 2022, Sawyer. Those were his words. That's the sentence I bought a lease renewal with, and I have been paying for it every day since, and I would like you to understand that I did not invent it. I recognized it. Third time. The same 11 words coming back to me across 4 years and 2 families and a telephone, in a third man's mouth. You're going to be at that wedding on Saturday, he said. My father's been telling me that for 2 weeks. That isn't what I said. A breath. I said you're going to be at it. Not alone. And then Harlan Vance hung up, and I stood in a parking lot and held a phone against my chest for a minute and a half. I drove to my grandmother's porch and sat on the top step in the last of the light and told her what Harlan Vance had said. She was quiet for a long time. "He's not inviting you," she said. "He's confessing, and he's decided to do it in the most expensive room he owns." I told her I'd decide Friday. Brenly Sutcliffe knocked on my door at 6:10 on Friday evening. I knew her face off a save-the-date my sister had left on a counter. She had a paper bag in one hand with wine in it that she had clearly bought in a parking lot and did not want. "They're upstairs with my grandmother till 7:30, I said. She came in and sat on the edge of the thrift store couch with her back very straight and did not take her coat off. "I've been driving since 2, she said. "I've been to the boathouse, I've been to my mother's, I sat in the parking lot at the mall for 50 minutes. I don't actually know why I came here except that everybody I've talked to today has an opinion about what this does to them." "That's fair." She said, "There's a lab report from 2022. "There are 2. I sat down across from her. "One I paid for in May of that year. One his father paid for in October." "Can I see them?" "Yes." I went into the small bedroom and came back with both, and I laid them flat on the table, and I did not say anything while she read, and she read all 4 pages all the way through, including the loci tables that mean nothing to anybody. Then she sat back with her hands flat on her thighs. "I'm going to marry him tomorrow," Brenly said. I didn't say anything. "Say something." "I've been trying not to have an opinion about your life for about 90 seconds and it's going well so far." Something happened at the corner of her mouth that was not a smile. "Can I ask you something and you tell me the truth even if it's ugly?" she said. "Yes." "Did he ever say anything to you about them? Ever?" "Once." "What?" I thought about the sandwich bag in the box in the small bedroom, and about a lawyer on the 11th floor telling me it was a brick, and about the fact that there is a difference between evidence and testimony, and I was allowed to be the second one. "On the 9th of February 2022, I said. 3 days after they were born at 11:40 at night, I asked him whether he was going to come and see them. And he said, "I'm not going to look at something I'm not going to be able to walk away from." Brenly Sutcliffe sat very still. "That's his father's voice coming out of his mouth," she said. "Yes. He doesn't even know it's not his." "No. They usually don't." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "I have 390 people coming." "I know." "My mother's flown in from Tulsa." "I know." "You're not going to tell me what to do." "No," I said. "I've had 4 years of people who were sure about my life, and I'm not going to be one for yours." She stood up at the door and stopped on the step with her back to me, and then she turned around. "No, listen to me." She had her keys in her fist. "I have one thing to say and then I'll shut up and go. If you come tomorrow, and I don't know if you should, I genuinely don't, but if you come, don't come to do something to somebody. Every version of this where you go in there to do something to somebody, you lose. You lose even if it works. The only version that's yours is the one where you go in and sit down and are just a person who was invited." "Why would you tell me that?" "Because I'm 26 and I've been engaged for 11 months, Brenly said, "and I have learned exactly one thing in that family, which is that they can survive anything except being looked at by somebody who isn't performing." Then she went and got in her car and sat in it for 4 minutes before she started it. We got there at 4:10. I want to be clear that I did not have a plan. I had a dress from 2019 and 3 4-year-olds and clothes my grandmother had pressed on her own board upstairs, and Junie had picked a yellow dress off the rack at a consignment place on 6th and would not be moved off it. Rosalind Vance was standing at the top of the ramp in a gray-green suit, alone, watching the parking lot, and she had been standing there, I found out later, since 10 to 4. She came down the ramp. "Hello," she said. "I'm Rosalind." Junie said, "I'm Junie and this is my brother and my sister and we're going to clap." "That's exactly right," Rosalind said, and her voice went, and she got it back. "I've got seats for you. Come with me." She walked us in through the middle. Not around the side, not to the back, down the center of the deck, past 40 rows, with 3 4-year-olds holding hands in a chain because Bo had decided somewhere in the parking lot that this was the correct formation. I want to be exact about what happened in that room because I've heard it told 3 different ways since. Nobody gasped. That isn't what happens. What happens is quieter and much worse. It goes row by row like a wind moving across a field, a small turn of a head and then the head next to it, and a woman's hand going onto her husband's arm, and somebody's program stopping halfway to their lap. 390 people doing the same arithmetic in the same 4 seconds, exactly the way my sister said they would. Because they didn't need a document. Bo Landry has his father's jaw. Marlo has his hairline. And Junie, in a yellow dress she picked herself, has the exact face of the woman in the oil portrait that hangs in Harlan Vance's dining room, his own mother, painted in 1971. Rosalind sat us in the 4th row. 4th. On the family side. Harlan Vance was at the end of the 2nd row in a gray suit. He turned around once. He looked at my children for a long moment and his face did something complicated and he turned back and he did not look again, and I have decided I don't need to know what that was. My father was in the 11th row on the aisle in the suit he wore to his mother's funeral. My mother beside him. Georgia and Preston behind them. Dallas Landry looked at his 3 grandchildren walking down the center aisle of the Cordova Point Boathouse in front of every person he had spent 4 years performing for, and his jaw set, and he leaned over and said one word to my mother, and I read it off him from 30 feet away because I have been reading that man my whole life. Alone. He'd told me I'd go and I'd go alone. He'd said it in a kitchen with his arms folded, flat and finished, the way he says things that are over. I was not alone. I had never once in 4 years been alone. The quartet changed key. Everybody stood up. Colton Reed Vance was at the front with his hands in front of him, and he looked out over the standing crowd for his bride, and on the way there his eyes went across the 4th row. And he stopped. Not a stumble. Not a gasp. He went completely still, the whole of him, hands, face, the small motions a person makes without knowing they're making them, and he stood there frozen at the front of a wedding with 390 people on their feet, looking at a 4-year-old boy in a navy blazer with his own jaw. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. In a room that size, 5 seconds is a very long time. His best man said something to him. He didn't move. Then Brenly came up the aisle on her father's arm and he had to look at her, and he did. They got married. I want that in the record because it's true and because people always assume it didn't happen. The officiant said the words. Colton said his vows and dropped a line and had to be given it again. Brenly said hers looking right at him, clear the whole way through, and she did not cry, and the only person in that building who understood what she was actually saying was standing in the 4th row holding a 4-year-old's hand. They clapped. Junie clapped. We left at 5:30, which is the time I'd decided on Wednesday before any of it. On the way out a woman I didn't know put her hand on my arm and said, "You have beautiful children," and I said thank you, and that was the entire conversation, and it was the first time in 4 years anybody in that county had said a sentence about them to my face that wasn't about anything else. The accounting came in September. Delilah Pruitt got the trust's books after a motion that Harlan Vance did not oppose, which his own lawyer told him not to do and which he did anyway. The ground lease on 11 acres at the port had been distributing since 1996. The arrears owed to 3 beneficiaries who had been in the class since February of 2022 came to $2.14 million, and the going-forward share is a quarterly number that will be paid into a trust for them until they're 18 and after that will be theirs to look at directly. Harlan resigned as trustee in October. He wasn't removed, there was a hearing calendared and he stepped down 11 days before it. A bank in Seattle is the corporate trustee now, and the first thing it did was send me a form letter with 3 names on it, spelled correctly, which is a thing that had never happened before in any document I'd ever received. There was no criminal case. Delilah told me there wouldn't be and she was right. Colton and Brenly separated on the 11th of August, 7 weeks after the wedding. It was final in the spring. She kept nothing of theirs and moved to Ballard and she sends the kids a birthday card in February, all 3 names. Rosalind Vance did not leave her husband. She goes to the duplex on the 3rd Saturday of the month at 10 in the morning and stays 2 hours, and Harlan has never come, and I have never suggested it. She sat on my floor in a good coat this January while Marlo explained the entire hierarchy of rocks to her. I asked her once whether it cost her what she thought it would. More, she said. Ask me if I'd do it again. I did. Ask me faster next time, she said. Bo Vance came up in October with a bunk bed he'd built, unasked, and put it together in the big bedroom in 4 hours. He met his nephew. He looked at him for a second too long and then said, "You named him Bo." "After my grandmother's husband," I said. Beauregard Landry. He died in 1998. Bo Vance laughed once at the floor. "There's 2 of us," he said. "Well, that's fine. That's fine." The store closed in November. Not because of me. Harlan Vance did not touch that lease, and I want that said plainly, because half of Gig Harbor decided he had. My father closed it because a man who had run a marine supply for 31 years discovered that he could not stand behind that register and have men ask him how his daughter was doing. He came in April. Just once so far. He sat on the thrift store couch for 50 minutes and let Junie tell him about a dog and assembled a shelf that did not need assembling, and at the door he said, "They're set now anyway," meaning the money. "Therefore," I said. "They're not set, they're funded. It's not the same thing and it's not close." He nodded and got in the car and drove home. My mother calls on Sundays. Georgia and I are further along than that. She came in February with a cake and stood in my kitchen and said, "I want to say the thing," and I said all right, and she said, "I didn't ask because I didn't want the answer in the room," and I said I know, and that was the whole conversation, and it was more than 4 years had produced. Magnolia is 79 now and still wakes at 4:40. It isn't nothing. It's just very small and it's going very slowly, and I've stopped pretending that's a failure. 3 things if you're standing where I was standing at a sink in May with a piece of cardstock in your hand. First, keep the record. Not for them, for you. I wrote down every 90 minutes of 19 weeks in a $1.79 notebook because a night nurse told me to, and 4 years later a lawyer in Seattle laid 5 documents across a conference table, and the only reason any of them made sense in order was that I had written the order down. So it's just me. Come by. George's house in Gig Harbor is the kind of house where the entry has a bench in it that nobody has ever sat on. She met me at the door with a glass of wine already going and looked past me at the car. "They're in the car?" "Therefore, Georgia, they're not going to hotwire it. I'm parked in your driveway." Bring them in, I've got the..." She waved at the back of the house. "There's a thing in the family room." The thing in the family room was a television the size of a door playing Animals That Sing, and my children went into it the way water goes into a drain, and Georgia and I stood in her kitchen on either side of an island the length of my bedroom. "Dad called me last night," she said. "I figured." "He's not wrong, Sawyer. That's a hell of an opener." "Okay." She set the bottle down. "Okay, but hear the whole thing because I've thought about this since Sunday and I'm going to say it badly and I want credit for saying it at all." "Go ahead." "You think this is about the store." "I think the store is in it." "The store's in it." "Fine. The store's in it." She turned her glass by the stem. "But it's not why he's like this, and you know it isn't. He's like this because for 4 years he has stood in that shop and had men ask him how his daughter's doing, and he has said fine, and then they've gone out to the parking lot. And that's my fault." "It's not about fault." "It sounds a great deal like fault." "It's about a man who can't stand being pitted," Georgia said, "which, incidentally, is also a description of you." I let that sit. It wasn't wrong and it wasn't the point, and she knew both of those things. "Why am I here, Georgia?" She looked at the family room. Junie was narrating the television to Beau, who was not listening, and Marlo was standing about 4 feet back from both of them with her hands behind her, watching the room instead of the screen. "It's because of them." She tipped her head toward the family room, toward the singing animals. "That's the whole thing. That's all it's ever been." "I know that." "No, you know it in a general way. I'm going to say the specific way, and then you can throw me out of my own kitchen." She put the glass down. "If you walk into that boathouse alone in a nice dress and you're pleasant to Rosalind and you don't stay for dinner, then in 8 days it's over. People say, 'Oh, she came, good for her, wasn't that gracious,' and it dies. That's it. That's the whole cost. And if I bring my children?" "Then it's never over," Georgia said. "Not for you and not for them. Then it's a thing that happened at a wedding and it gets told for 20 years and it gets told badly and every single person in that room goes home and does the arithmetic on their own out loud in the car, and there is no version of that arithmetic where you come out of it as anything but the woman who did it in front of 400 people." "Did what?" "Sawyer." "No, say it." "Did what, Georgia?" "Made a claim you can't prove." She got loud and pulled it back immediately, the way she does, glancing toward the family room. "That's what it is. That is exactly what it is. A claim you can't prove, made in the worst possible room. A test in a folder that nobody's going to ask to see." She said it fast and then she stopped because she'd said the last part out loud. I set my keys down on her island very carefully. "Say that again." "Sawyer, you said a folder." I said. She put her hand over her mouth for a second. Mom told me, years ago, that you'd said something about a test at a Thanksgiving. Mom told you? Yes. When? I don't know. 22, 23. It was a phone call. She said it like she was worried about you. Worried about me? That's the word she used. Did you ever ask me? Georgia looked at the counter. No, she said. In 3.5 years, did anybody in this family ever ask me one question about it? No. Not one. No, Sawyer. I didn't fill the silence after that. I let it go for about 6 full seconds, and Georgia looked at the counter for 4 of them and then up at me for the last 2, and I have thought many times since about what was on her face, and the honest answer is that it was relief. Not cruelty. Relief. She had been carrying a thing she'd decided not to look at, and I had just taken it out of the drawer for her, and some part of her was glad to be done being the person who hadn't. Because if you'd asked, I said, I'd have told you. I know. No. Listen to what I'm saying. If any one of you had ever asked me a single plain question, I would have driven to your house and put it on that island and said here, read this, and you know exactly what I'd have been putting down, because you just described it. You called it a test in a folder. You've been calling it that in your own head for 3 years. That's not what It's precisely what you meant. I picked my keys back up. You didn't ask because you didn't want the answer in the room. Because as long as nobody's asked, everybody gets to keep being reasonable about it. Don't do that. I'm not doing anything to you, Georgia. I'm telling you what 4 years looked like from where I was standing. And where were you standing? At a sink, I said. Mostly at a sink. Then I got my kids off the rug and put their shoes on and drove home. I want to explain about the notebook because everything after this runs through it. I didn't do the first year by myself and I did not do it by myself. Second, there is a difference between having the truth and being able to spend it, and nobody who has never been in that gap believes it exists. I sat on a piece of paper for 3 years and my whole family read that as a confession. It wasn't. It was a woman who understood that a thing you spend badly is a thing you don't have anymore. Third, the room does its own arithmetic. I walked 3 children down the middle of a wedding and never said one word, and 390 people arrived somewhere in 4 seconds that I could not have argued them into in 10 years. You don't have to make the case. You just have to stop hiding the evidence, and sometimes the evidence is a 4-year-old in a yellow dress who picked it out herself. They start kindergarten in the fall. All 3 same school, 8 blocks from the freeway. Bo has already asked whether he can put his shoes in a line in the classroom. This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real emotional truths many families carry. If this reminded you of your own family, tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe for the next one.